speaker, who's Alex Lehnerer. Alex Lehnerer is currently Professor of Architecture and Urban Design at the ETH in Zurich, and he's where he also, I think, got his PhD from, and a master's from the University of California at Los Angeles. Alex is also a practitioner and urban designer, and he works as a partner at Kaisersroth and Kyriakides Lehnerer Architekten in Zurich. That's very difficult to say. His recent work includes the Bungalow Germania for last year's Venice Biennale, and the recent book that was published, The Western Town, A Theory of Aggregation, and probably the book that you might have seen on grand urban rules. One of the reasons we invited Alex is because I think there are a number of shared interests, I think, to look at urban design and questions of specific design proposals. So I think it's a great opportunity to have him here tonight. And please welcome Alex.
Yeah, so thank you very much, Sam, for inviting me here. We had a very pleasurable day or afternoon with your students. Sam already said, named a couple of projects which I'm going to talk about today. I entitled my presentation Architecture's Present Perfect. I mean, I somehow at one point I got reminded of me as a schoolboy having to learn English grammar, and one of the hardest things for me to learn was this kind of the present perfect tense, which is a kind of weird concept, which is a kind of time between the past and the present. Yeah, so that was actually something that I found very hard, which also because lately I did a couple of projects which kind of got into the weird business of trying to also find my own connection towards history. I'm not an historian, but I'm of course somehow at least half of myself is some kind of academic, where architectural history always plays some bigger role. And so I like the idea of some kind of continuous past or continuous presence, which kind of is a kind of past with some kind of unfinished time in the present. So this is I did over the last years a couple of projects which kind of tackle the issue of history, which is one of the very dubious terms for me. Another dubious term for me is collective form. I mean, ever since it got officially introduced by Fumiko Maki in the 60s, it still remains something very strange. The question is, the idea of a collective is quite obvious in urban design, but how can a collective become form? So I think Maki also didn't really answer it in an absolute way, and I think there is no absolute answer to what collective form is. I think it's more or less always a kind of very contextual question, and collectives are formed in various kinds of ways. So I will talk a little bit about that. So the projects I'm going to show really try to find some kind of collective setting within a kind of historical view onto our own discipline with very kind of specific vehicles. The way history, or a very common or a very conventional present perfect technique is to spoil something from the past, a story from the past, to loot that and to implement or to inject it into some kind of new or present tense context, like this. What I also found very interesting over the last years is to inverse that direction, to almost to take something of the here and now and reintroduce it into a kind of past event. I guess you all know Woody Allen's Zelig, where he injects himself, where he montages himself into a kind of past context. Here you see him standing next to the 30th and the 31st President of the United States, Hoover and Coolidge. So there's almost an inverse direction of this kind of insertion of of history. So it's going this way and this way. So I like those projects where like basically the two directions are blurred, and kind of where it's kind of uncertain in which point of time we are actually. So there's two projects that are important for me in that sense. One is the Western Town projects, which I will start off with, and it became somehow the precedent for our work at the Biennale last year. It's already far away. It's already gone completely. Actually, the next Biennale is already on its way. The Western Town the ideas which we developed in the Western Town are kind of preceding the main idea of the Bungalow Germania project for the German Pavilion in Venice. Has anybody been to Venice last year? At least two people there. Great. So, but that's why I'm also here. I mean, to also get Venice a little bit to London. For the Western Town project, we took a quote by a nameless newspaper man quite seriously, who said, "This is the Wester when the legend becomes fact. Print the legend." It also does that very nicely. The Western Town, or the Western movies, the Hollywood movies, did something very fascinating. They inserted a kind of new story into a kind of past event, into a kind of past typology of the urbanized context of the West, which we probably would have almost completely forgotten if the Hollywood movie didn't pick that context up, because of course the Jeffersonian grid came and completely had this typology of these outpost towns of the West vanished from the ground. So it started as some kind of hobby project of us. At one point, out of curiosity, we went to the Nevada and to the Californian desert and revisited all those places of those Hollywood movies, of those Western movies. So here you see on the top, you see the stranger riding into town with his horse. Our horse is down there on the lower right. And the fascinating thing was what we found there. We actually found nothing there. Yeah, so we went to these places, and these places had a very strong physical reality, the desert, but the item which these places are famous for is completely gone, meaning those towns. So the Mono Lake is still there, the context, the desert is there, but the city itself completely vanished from the ground, which is kind of quite fascinating, because you go there and you think like you want to go there, you want to really see these kind of artifactual cities or these fictional settings, but nothing's really there, but still the memory of it is there, which is quite intriguing to us. The same here in Idaho, the famous town of Largo of Pale Rider, and you see down below, it took us quite a while to find it, but it must have been right there, yeah? But again, there's nothing, yeah? Nothing is left behind. And I guess it's the only type of city that was able, in the history of the city, that was able to completely vanish from the ground. So we went to a couple of places, and there's one town which is a kind of very beautiful antithesis to this kind of completely vanishing moment, which is Pioneer Town, which was inaugurated. It's in California, next to Joshua Tree, and it got inaugurated in the year 1946, exactly when they shot a Western movie at this place. So the interesting thing how this whole city started was really just like this. It was a door in the wall in the desert, yeah? So they shot this movie, and the only thing they did not do here is to take it off again. So after a while, these fronts got backed up and inhabited, yeah? Not in a very like structured way, but this was actually the start of this town. It was a complete fictional start. So this was really the kind of contradiction to all the other places we found. And anyhow, I think this also triggered our interest to actually like to work on this kind of fuzzy link between fiction the imaginary and the actual physical presence of these towns. So in order to fully embrace this typology as architects, we had to kind of discipline these towns. Yeah, we could of course watch all these movies over and over again, but at one point we wanted to speculate on what their plan or what their layout was, what their actual layout was. So we did some research in the actual history of El Paso, but at one point we said, okay, that's kind of interesting, but what is even more interesting to us is the kind of fictional town plan of El Paso, yeah, which has nothing to do with its actual reality, but it at least carries the same name. So there is some kind of virtual reality between the fictional and the real El Paso. So I think by drawing these plans, we kind of, these plans allowed us to then like use these town types as a vehicle to formulate also like a critique on the contemporary state of the city and on the making of cities of today. These towns are usually referred of street town types, yeah, as one giant street. But the paradoxical thing is that there is no street. Very unlike the kind of modernist way of building or extending cities, where you first put in the infrastructure and then later on fill in the structures that should be supported by that infrastructure. So at one point, I think we felt very like unhappy about the order of development, because we also felt that at one point the infrastructure, whether it's in Berlin or in Orange County, California, the infrastructure becomes somehow a little bit too autonomous, yeah? So there is, and I think that's what infrastructure should never do, and that's also maybe the kind of biggest deficiency of infrastructure today. This is very, very unlike the Western town, whether real or fake works. There is no such thing as a street. The street only develops, or the street is only as long as how many houses line up in order to form that street. And also in terms of like these additional infrastructures, like the sidewalk, there's also no sidewalk, there's only porches. But the porch doesn't come as a kind of continuous whole, but it's formed as a kind of aggregation and lining up of individual houses which carry this piece of infrastructure always with them. And that's, I think, very intriguing and very inspiring also to try to do that in a contemporary design practice. Yeah, so that is basically the case in all of these town plans. Here you see the actual town of Lago, which I showed you, which we kind of visited. And this is also the only moment when the stranger himself became a true urban designer. Because at one point, this village or this little town was threatened by gangsters, and the stranger rode into town, and at first he didn't want to help them, but then he decided, okay, I help you if you paint the whole town red. He didn't give any reasons for doing so, but the villagers did it, and at one point the whole town was painted red. Yeah, and there was some kind of surreal consistency produced out of these individual items and the individual units by this color red. So this is really the kind of only time when the stranger actually cared for his environment. But I'll get back to the stranger later, because the stranger is also a very important figure for us, also in terms of some kind of idealized user for today's cities. These plans also helped us to tackle the eternal fight or the eternal discussion between object and texture. I think one it was prominently introduced by Colin Rowe, of course, by Collage City, this kind of juxtaposition of the idea of the Uffizi, yeah, as part of texture, as only back, and of course juxtaposed or inverted by modern architecture, by, for example, the Unité. And I think for us, Also borrowing a term from a theoretician like Anthony Widler, the Western town produces some kind of third typology. It's a kind of an aggregated structure, but still how it is located and how it composes itself, it's still very figural, and it's still, and you kind of still are able to regard this this plan or this layout as a kind of bigger object, yeah. But at the same time, it's part of the texture, or it's composed out of texture. So we called it textured figure, and I think that is also some kind of, yeah, for us, this is our own like third typology, which we are trying to look for in the contemporary city. And also like with this kind of third typology, with the idea of the third typology, we are also able to enjoy some plans and some projects even more. Mainly those of Charles Moore. You see here his Kresge College campus in Oregon. And I think this is exactly what he did, yeah? It's a kind of larger figure which is composed out of single entities. And it also, like this kind of phantom of this kind of combination of object and texture was also like highly chased in the 60s and 70s with all these kind of famous and infamous town center plans. Very dominantly, of course, here in Great Britain. So we also look at that. There's a kind of very nice chase of this phantom of between texture and object by the Creer brothers, and there's also Corby Town Center. I don't know, is it still existing or is it already torn down? On the bottom, there was a kind of heyday of these kind of town centers. It got celebrated quite a bit. So there was a whole architectural review on that type, where the ambition was very big to produce some kind of solution for the city by one singular architectural intervention. So that was really like the idea that you could solve certain urbanistic problems by injecting something as a big object and to define or to redefine or to artificially define a new center. So I think the Western town always relates towards these kind of structures, which cannot really be described as mega structures. Yeah, I think that's something else, because they always aggregate in a certain way, and also like they become these kind of immersed or inlaid or injected figures into an existing context. Now, I like one word for the stranger. I think the last century was quite big in inventing idealized users. Just to name a few, there's the nomad of Constant, there's the participant of Benham, there's the Bürger of Loos, of course there's the bachelor and the consumer, and there's also the noble savage by Corbusier. I think these guys are extremely forceful because and determining the design, because somehow they are the kind of users. The designs require these kinds of users. So if you wanted to live in a Corbusier building, you had to be somehow a noble savage. No, there's no other way around it. And now the stranger, I think, is something different. The biggest quality of the stranger is that he is really like totally indifferent to his context. You could almost say that he rides into town just the same way he rides out of town. So I think maybe in that kind of regard and in that quality, the stranger is only maybe beaten by today's tourist. So in a way, the stranger for us is some kind of idealized user of our contemporary times, which is totally non-deterministic and not trying to impose himself on the town or on today's city fabric. We also discovered some very beautiful, I think, like looking at these movies, not as stage set, but as like really actual buildings, we found also some quite nice typologies. For example, the lean-to, there's structures that are no real structures, but they are just composed out of individual lean-tos. There's also the stable typology, which is quite nice because it's partly urban. It has an urban front, but then at the same time it's also suburban with this kind of pasture in the back. Yeah, so it's a kind of interrelated, interlocking typology of these kind of two main ideas of the city: the single object on a plot and the perimeter block. Then there's also recycling projects of former older structures, and then there's also the hideaway or the hideout, or what they call it, the hole in the wall, which also offers a nice critique on the kind of ever non-ending networking of our today's cities. I think there's also these moments necessary where you almost seclude yourself completely from your environment. One important structure we also discovered is the outhouse. The outhouse, I mean, is no longer within any kind of architectural or urbanistic discourse for good reasons. But I think we got kind of intrigued by this kind of implosion or explosion of the individual household in its kind of individual elements. Yeah, so the saloon is the kitchen, the brothel is the bedroom, and of course the outhouse is the bathroom. So I think thereby these towns manage with relatively low numbers to produce something like an interiorized like big architectural object, or also even like produce some kind of convincing image of a little town. So what you see here also, is this a, oh yeah, this is a, yeah. So you also see like, usually you only look at the front, yeah? But if you turn to the back of these towns, you see that these kind of outhouses also form their own little collective, which also produces some kind of moment of consistency, which I think is also like quite an interesting concept for aggregation. So we found that interesting that for last year's Biennale in Rotterdam, we imported an original outhouse, yeah, from the West here, and tried to see how that outhouse would ever fit into the kind of contemporary city of Rotterdam. So we tried to do some tests. First, we were, of course, a little bit, we didn't really know what to do, but then we started to place it, yeah, and see how this kind of outhouse as a kind of urban figure or as a kind of ancillary urban figure copes with the actual context of Rotterdam. And I mean, I don't know whether the output was particularly strong, but at least the outhouse goes well with Dutch modernism, yeah? The Sonneveld House in Rotterdam. So to repeat that, I think there is a kind of strong, what we're really interested in also as a design strategy is how the fictional can have a very strong and specific link with the physical and the kind of real. So there's no, like, there's a kind of, it does go full circle. This is the real mission building, and this is then the outhouse in the Western movie, and this is the real El Paso plan of that time. So the movies actually go full circle, yeah, and they kind of mix and mesh historical facts with contemporary truth. In a very beautiful way. So at one point you really don't know what is real and what is fake, and that also is a kind of very like strong way to conceive of our design practice. Yeah, like that we always intrude or inject some kind of story into the real. And the Western town, the Western movies of the Hollywood movies of Hollywood are a quite good example of doing exactly that. That also is really the kind of premise or the kind of pretext for this project for the Biennale last year. There is, of course, there was this kind of ambition by the main curator, by Koolhaas, to, there was a topic given out to the individual pavilions, to the national pavilions, which said, okay, absorbing modernity, 100 years looking back. So there was a task to combine both, to combine two stories, one of the story of modern architecture in that particular country, and then also the story of national history. So for us, as I said, we are not historians, we try to be architects, so we were kind of looking for some kind of architectural moment of how to communicate and how to combine these two stories of architectural history and of national history in one installation. So we found two characters that we hoped or we suspected or expected to do the job. One is the original German Pavilion in Venice. It's a building that mainly exists only of one giant entrance, yeah, which you can see here, which was built in 1909 and was refurbished in 1938. And that event of refurbishment actually made it a kind of political issue ever since after 45. Because, of course, Germany was always asking itself whether this building could actually represent the nation still after the war. And there's always there's not a too small a group of people who try to tear this building every year down. Yeah. Also last year there was a big group that said, okay, let's redo this building. It's not suitable for the new Germany after the war. And I kind of agree, but I also would like to question whether walls can be guilty. Yeah. On the other hand, so this is the 38 example, and then there's this building. Does anybody know what this building is? I would also like, you know, Sam, right? Yeah, yeah, but you're half German, right? And so this is the kind of follow-up of this, in a certain way. So this is the kind of the house of the German Chancellor, which was built in 1964 by the second Chancellor of the new Federal Republic of Germany, by Ludwig Erhard. And this was a kind of piece of anti-representation. So this should be really the complete opposite of this building. There's no columns there. There's a lot of transparency there. It's like a kind of German version of a Craig Elwood house. Yeah. So this also goes full circle. Mies inspires Craig Elwood, inspires then Sepp Roof in Bonn to build this house. It was completely hidden. It didn't have any kind of public facade. It was hidden in the park in Bonn, the former capital, or the former temporary capital of Germany. So in 1999, this building got completely useless because the government decided, or Germany decided to put its capital back where it is, or where it belongs to Berlin. So not only this building vanished from the scene, but also the whole town of Bonn vanished from the international discourse, or the international landscape and map of Germany. So here you see, yeah, maybe a word for the pavilion. I think we lived for about 3 months in this building to build this exhibition. And at one point, of course, this building didn't appear that cruel to us anymore. Yeah, I mean, this building, this picture was taken from the British Pavilion, and I think even like Sam Jacob did the British Pavilion. I think he was even a little jealous that we had such a giant porch to put our barbecue here. So he was also like a frequent guest before the Biennale started. And I think this was a very beautiful, maybe this was the most beautiful moment for us at the Biennale, because we were suddenly completely on our own with this huge, giant villain guy, this German pavilion. And the bungalow itself, we call it bungalow. I think in the American terminology, a bungalow is something else, but the Germans are kind of famous for like using American terms in the wrong way, so or English terms. So it had everything a kind of typical German bungalow of that time needed to have. It had a little canopy, it had a little patio, of course a little nice chimney, and everything was made out of glass. Here's the River Rhine, and here's a big yard all around. And the building was only accessible through media, yeah? So there was a big fence around. So it was also like, it's a good example of Colomina's argument that there is some life of architecture in a different medium, yeah? In the kind of image. So our idea was to really take that building out of its context, out of its kind of hidden context, and pull it onto the stage in Venice and intersect it with the pavilion there. I just picked this image for you guys because you had the Queen and we only had Helmut Kohl. Do you still remember Helmut Kohl? I guess you do. I have to kind of say that it's also a little bit autobiographical, because I kind of grew up with Helmut Kohl, and I'm on the one hand kind of very fascinated by this image, but also a little bit embarrassed, I have to say. But to the, how about you, Sam? Are you also like a little bit embarrassed? Yeah, but to the advantage of Helmut Kohl, I have to say, Helmut Kohl is the only person who adds some weight to this scene, because like the bungalow itself doesn't do it. Yeah, it's so shaky. Yeah, it's void of any kind of usual conventional representational items. Yeah, there's no columns, nothing there. It almost falls apart in the background of these kind of important figures. Also, like how he then changed the building. It looks more like a Gaddafi tent than a kind of building of proper state representation. And I think that like it is really like it was referred to as the nation's living room. Yeah. So the building had two functions. It had a very private function of the living space of the chancellor. The chancellor had to really live there, and at the same time he had to represent the nation. So this is also a good example where the collective is supposed to be represented in one single architectural piece. And you see it's really very, very domestic. This is not his wife, but just as a side note. So in order to understand how these two buildings got utilized and also like overused in terms of some medium of communication is when you see what their clients said about them. There's one very beautiful sentence which Ludwig Erhard said when this building got opened. You will find more about me if you look at this house than if you watch me deliver a political speech. I think that was still when architecture was supposed to have some kind of value, yeah? Also some kind of societal value. I mean, there's probably nothing more beautiful you can hear as an architect when someone says something like this on your building. And at the same time, I have to say, I have a little disclaimer, I don't want to, like by no means want to compare Ludwig Erhard with this guy, but he said something kind of spectacularly similar. When people are experiencing great times internally, they also find external images for these times. Their word is more persuasive than any spoken word, for it is a word made of stone. I think what is really like intriguing here is that it's two completely opposite political regimes, but they both of them are using architecture as a very like strong medium of communication. So we thought like if these two buildings are able to speak, yeah, we want to make them speak to one another. So this was the kind of initial collage. And we first thought that these buildings of a complete different kind of architecture would really not get along very well with each other. And I think, like, as you can see here, a lot of kind of rude violations also happened to both buildings. So this kind of non-directional building, this bungalow, got heavily directed by this giant portico, and it was also then it then also got again like proper stairs, yeah, like all these kind of means of representation attached. And of course, in the interior, this is the kind of directional space of the pavilion that got heavily directed by the kind of patio of the bungalow. So here you see the whole plan. We really like rebuilt, or I mean, we had the bungalow travel one-to-one from Bonn to Venice and have it intersected with the pavilion. So the idea was really like to answer Kohlhaase's question, like absorbing modernity. It was kind of enigmatic to us until the end what absorption actually means, because it has so many different meanings. So we tried to let one building be absorbed by the other. So one building is actually was supposed to criticize the other, and also like serve as a lens to read the other. So one building should be really like read through the other without, and the only thing we wanted to do is not to put anything else than these two buildings there. So no explanation, no captions. So the question was really like, can those two buildings do that? Can those two buildings talk about their mutual histories with one another? What is also interesting is that then, like, it wasn't really that kind of big clash. The interesting thing was how how peacefully these two buildings then also like interacted with one another. So for example, the bungalow roof, the canopy, this is outside of the bungalow, respectfully stops just 30 centimeters before the pavilion wall comes down. And here you see really this kind of overlay and superimposition of these two buildings that then also start to intersect with one another. So you see all these kind of time differences and layers of time juxtaposing each other. And the interesting thing for us is that the question or the experiment whether they can actually do their job here. It is it's a very physical installation, which really has no other illustration than the material itself. And of course, the question is, can this piece of brick speak? So the question for us is, or you can look at this piece of brick only from the viewpoint of its materiality. But at one point, you really have enough of it. Yeah, the brick doesn't talk to you at all. Yeah, so you start to think about the kind of secondary layer of meaning of that kind of brick. Like, what does it embody, and what kind of other meaning can it have? And that also probably the brick doesn't answer that question as well. So then you go back to the materiality. So there's a kind of back and forth discussion between material and its kind of other meaning. And that was also one of the most important things for us to understand, and also to create this kind of certain discomfort. Yeah. So you don't get any kind of explicit explanation of what it is, and you also don't get all these scenes to be seen in this pavilion. But I think, but at the same time, the bungalow was always the background of these important political scenes. Here's also another party of the royal family, and basically the whole Cold War discussions that took place in Germany also had this bungalow as a kind of background. So it was really the kind of mise en scene of German politics, of German post-war politics. And it got even worse because, like, all the elements we took from Bonn to Venice also lost their original functions. We tried very hard, yeah, to give it back its function by lighting up this chimney, but of course you can imagine that we had to like shut it down quite fast again, because it also like made breathing really hard in the pavilion. So, for example, also the glass is considered in Germany as some kind of weird democratic material. Yeah. So what you can see when you can see through something, it's supposed to be very honest. But of course, here in our pavilion, it also lost its kind of view to the outside. The only thing you saw when you looked through this glass was to see this kind of blank white wall. But the question for us was also like, how do we get the context of the park into the pavilion? So we have this little bird here, yeah, because we like birds very much. But of course, there was no park. But then these guys helped us out. These guys are chocolatieri. Yeah? The Italians are actually quite famous for bird singing. This is a bird caller, and his colleague actually is the world champion in bird calling. So we got these 8 old guys to be in this pavilion over the 6 months and to sing all the birds, yeah, from Bonn, but not the birds that are there today, but all the birds that are extinct since 1964. So here you see the world champion doing the nightingale for our state minister, and she's obviously enjoying herself very much. It also like it really offered a kind of it also balanced the strong materiality and the strong presence of the kind of installation with this kind of ephemeral moment of these kind of bird singers. And they also like this is quite obvious what he's doing here, but they were always standing then there in the space and like singing these kind of birds. And you passed by this old guy and suddenly you heard a bird singing, but he would not disguise himself. So it really gave the impression, like acoustic impression, of that kind of past time 50 years ago. I really love this. So here he's again. Quite obvious still, yeah? We trained him to hide a little bit more. So and here you see like the kind of the whole drama of each morning. So this is the kind of canopy I showed you before, which is now no longer indicating the main entrance of the bungalow, but funny enough, like indicating this little door, this dwarf door of like which leads you up on the top of this building. And then here you see that the bungalow roof, unfortunately, is a little lower than the doors of the pavilion. So every morning we open the pavilion, it cut into the bungalow roof. Yeah. Here's some other impressions. I mean, I never talked so much. I never this exhibition like remained very enigmatic to many people. Yeah. So some people also complained about that they didn't get the full story. Yeah. So I'm telling you now the full story, but there were also people like who were saying, yeah, what's it all about? Yeah. But there were also some people who realized what it was. It was, for us, it was important that these buildings, that is not necessarily a kind of very spectacular event, but the interesting thing is that these two potentially very loud buildings started to be very quiet next to one another and intersecting one another. So one building is almost neutralizing the other, which is very, very interesting to us in terms of like, what's the whole purpose of using architecture as forms of communication? Here's even Helmut Kohl's kitchen is here. That's the now too low apsis. Of course, we also brought some furniture. This is the couch that didn't want to move, so it got cut by the pavilion. And of course, the only historical artifact we brought was Kohl's original car. It's a 5-ton armored Mercedes. There was never before a car at this location in Venice. But this serves as a kind of nodal point for us that starts this whole story about state representation, because these cars are always part of the game of representing, yeah, of making a kind of celebrity entrance to the structures behind. So as I said, this is the actual public facade of the bungalow in Bonn. You don't see anything, yeah. So we kind of wanted to climb over this building and kidnap and hijack this building for our purpose of telling this story between like of state representation and this kind of almost like forlorn endeavor to use architecture as forms of communication. So we really wanted to smuggle ourselves also into the history of that building, which we kind of grew up with. And once you type in Kanzler Bungalow, yeah, Chancellor Bungalow today, there's of course all these kind of scenes of the past, but suddenly you also see Venice here, yeah, and the car. So there's a kind of strange simultaneity of these places of Bonn and Venice, which kind of become part of the history of the Kanzler Bungalow. So we kind of extended his story a little bit. And the bungalow also lives on because we gave all the wood to also some old Italian Venetian guys like who do some wood chipping as a hobby, yeah, a whittling group. So the national representation of Germany ends up as cooking spoons in Italian cooking pots. So I think it will have an afterlife in a completely dysfunctional place or a complete different way. It was never supposed to be, but I think that's also something which we find very strong and beautiful, and which also adds to this kind of ephemerality of the exhibition. Now it's of course all gone, and there's nothing left in the pavilion, just like the towns of the West in the desert of Nevada. Yeah, so I mean, I took you from the city all the way to the spoon. I think there was one guy who said that's what an architecture do, right? To design everything from the city all the way until the spoon. So I should basically stop here. I don't know, do we have like, how long did I talk? 40 minutes? I mean, I could also I could also talk a little bit about this project, which maybe some of you might know. This is haunting me already for quite a while, and I also I have to say the camera is running, so I'm ruining my career here if I say that I got a little tired over the years to be always the kind of rules guy. Yeah, I have a very I have some kind of I have a certain fetish with bureaucracy. So I like bureaucracy. I like forms, and I like norms, and I also like rules. So it's also okay to be the rules guy. But also this project, I think, started off as a kind of historical or as a kind of experimental historical project, because we didn't want to retell the story of the last 100 years of the American city by just retelling the history, but using the rules or the kind of regulatory regimes to talk about actually the history of a place like Chicago. So how did it all end up like this, and also continued into the present? This is a depiction of Chicago, of the loop of Chicago in 1920, and it's hard to see any kind of plan in that, yeah. But there are, I think, there's a couple of rule sets at work which are highly interesting and which also explain the mess you see here. For us, I discovered 115 rules of the American cities, with some also conventions and traditions. Not all of these rules are like official codes. Sometimes also traditions or conventions which are not written down are sometimes much stronger than any kind of written down code. But this is basically the history of the last 100 years of the American city for us. There's a couple of experiences that drove me to that project of regulation, because I also it's also not hard to see that many of the big plans on our cities regularly failed in a very big time. So one of the big failures of big plans is, of course, the plan of Daniel Burnham of Chicago. The plan had did a lot of good things for the city, because it also served as a kind of major communication tool to bring the real estate guys together with the general public of the city of Chicago. But of course, it also failed. Daniel Burnham is the big plans guy, and I think I agree with him when he says that make no little plans, make big plans, because little plans are not able to steer a man's blood. Yeah, so there is a certain force to big plans. But also there's a common truth that big plans are very likely to fail in a big scale way. So this is his original plan with his city hall. And it's funny when you kind of superimpose these two plans, like his plan and the kind of contemporary layout of the city, where the only places where Burnham was successful was in the places that were already public land. Yeah, so it's kind of easy for an urban designer to transform land which you are kind of in control of. But the whole private property of Chicago kind of refused to go with that plan. Is also obvious. You don't want to have a giant axis run through your front yard or cut away half of your house. So, very opposite to maybe Baron Haussmann. Yeah, he didn't have any kind. He didn't have any kind of power of Haussmann with Napoleon III in his back. So many of the things failed, and except for this part here, and without cynicism, or maybe a little bit of irony. So this is a civic center, the vision of a very public space in Chicago. And when you look at the exact same place today, it also became the most public place in Chicago. Yeah, it is the biggest interchange, highway interchange, right in the middle of the city. So both places are very public, but through very different means. So I think this the acceptance that there must, or the realization that there must be something else than a plan, made me think of, okay, what is another instrument of urban design, and where can we learn from? So I think we learned a lot from city authorities that also have to cope with a very limited amount of control, over the city, over private property. So I think that was one reason why to look at rules and no longer at plans. Another reason was this. I guess you also have these kind of signs in Great Britain. It says you have to limit your speed to 80 kilometers per hour if it's wet. I have to also admit that I studied law before I studied architecture. And there was one moment in my law studies when we discussed this sign for 2 hours. And that was also the moment when I stopped studying law. I really couldn't stand it at that time. I hated this discussion, yeah? Because the teacher was basically asking, okay, when is exactly the moment when you have to lower your speed? So basically the question was, when is wet wet? Did you ever ask you this question? It's a kind of very important question. So is it wet when the street turns dark? Is it wet when there's a kind of continuous surface of water on the street? Or is it wet when you have to switch on your wipers? None of us could answer this at that time, yeah? Not even the teacher. She said that it's up to discretion of the judge, yeah? When you do a kind of accident, then I think it goes in front of court. Then the judge decides whether the street was wet or wasn't wet. So I thought, this is too much for me. I study something real, yeah, which is much more in control of those decisions. But by now, I think this was also the kind of interesting thing that urban design was lacking. This amount of Spielraum. Yeah, funny enough, there's no English word for Spielraum. So there's only a German word, just like Angst and Schadenfreude. So I think this kind of level of discretion is kind of what makes urban design so interesting, because there always has to be some kind of moment where you have to adjust control, yeah, where you have to also let loose in a certain way and leave things up for other people to decide, and you have to basically produce this space of discretion. Just like this sign did, and then I saw, like, when I was once driving through Arkansas, I saw that if you have a good rule, you can make anybody do anything, yeah. So it says no shooting, and then exactly you see here the holes of the bullets. So it produced the exact opposite effect, but at least it triggered some kind of behavior. So I think that was also some kind of realization that there are really important rules out there that really have a kind of strong connection to the individual interests of some people. And then I realized also that I grew up in a suburban area, but also like the whole discussion on the suburban in the United States is interesting, because there's a strong inertia in these places. Because if you look at these places, there's at least, like here you see 12 kinds of different rules that are in place and that safeguard the typology of the individual house on the individual parcel. So there's side yard rules, there's front yard, backyard rules. There's even rules that stipulate how far the curbs are apart for your driveway. Yeah, already this driveway width decides how far these buildings have to be apart. So I think architecture and the whole discipline can discuss the suburban dilemma forever, if not those rules start to change or try to get out of the way. So I think that was also like a moment where I started to get like heavily interested in it. Also by this incident, I was once living in LA, and this was our lawn. At a closer look, it was looking like, you can see these kind of nice flowers here. It is very opposite to our neighbor's lawn, with this kind of brilliant chemical green, yeah? And then one day, our neighbor came over and said, please mow your lawn. Your weeds are poisoning my lawn. And he said, no, get out of here. We don't do this. Yeah, for us, it's beautiful the way it is, yeah? And it's our land, yeah, because I I'm in America, my land is my land, yeah? I can do whatever I do on this piece of land. So he has no right whatsoever to intrude my individuality, yeah? What a greenhorn. Because at one point, yeah, this car parked in front of our house, and 2 minutes later, this guy was standing right in front of me and gave me a fine of $200, yeah? And told me if I don't do lawn care, that's what he said, he's going to come back and give me another fine. And if he comes back 3 times, I'm landing in front of court. Here you see like how strong these regulations are, yeah? There is a certain lawn care regulation in Santa Monica, California, yeah? Very opposite to my idea of freedom. So the end of of this kind of story was that our neighbor, yeah, gave us his lawnmower, yeah? Very nice of him, and we actually also in the end became kind of friends, yeah? And ever since I also figured out like how strong and forceful these regulations are. Much stronger, or there is no real plan, but there is a couple of very distinct regulations out there which are so strong that they are kind of invisible, but there's also like a kind of common acceptance of these codes. So the call of arms was, of course, that not every plan is planned, and also that plans need to be drawn, rules need to be played. And we started a group already long ago, which is also I don't know, 100 years ago. We managed to do an actual project with it in Holland, at the time when Holland was still very experimental. We did this. This is a computer program, but I have to also add a little disclaimer to it. It has not, I'm not a big fan of the computer, and it's not supposed to be in the kind of parametric corner of the discipline. It was just a very necessary tool for us to experiment and to play with it, because we thought, like if you remember if you recollect the neighbor situation, that we could maybe do urban design with just working with the desires and the wishes of the individual objects of the city. So this is the area you see here, and here's now all the individual objects. Yeah, the colors indicate certain wishes you could attach to these individual houses, and the more they shiver, the more unhappy they are. But we also have a church here, and we have a big guy here who's moving around, like taking his time and taking his space. So I can also like a little bit fast forward it. We have a church, yeah. This is maybe an interesting part for the ones of you who are very religious. So when the church moves, all the other guys follow who want to live next to the church. Very nice, huh? Yeah. You can go on forever. But also like a proper church also like follows its sheeps, yeah, but only to a certain extent. But the interesting thing here is also what I tried to describe in the Western Town project, that there's no infrastructure yet, yeah? It is only the objects with their individual like attitudes and ambitions. So, and the infrastructure actually comes at the very end, and that's what we needed the computer for, to process this. So, yeah, so you can put it, so the infrastructure is laid out at the very end. And this was actually, it's the most banal thing that every plot needs to have a kind of, it needs to be connected to the street, but it was quite difficult to do. And you still see that some people, that some guys aren't really happy where they are. But overall, it produced a layout, and it produced some kind of infrastructure after the fact. So yeah, and it has like it. So I think we ever since we try to use those the kind of history in like history of the city in those rules for design projects. I don't want to show these projects. I just want to show like 2 more rules, which are quite interesting. Like since Venturi, we found out how to make a monument, But how monuments are constructed, in fact, in Las Vegas is quite interesting to see, because it's very different. It's almost the kind of inversion of the rest of the world, because here you see how casinos are supposed to be built. And the building code of Las Vegas doesn't stipulate a maximum of fluorescent lighting, but a minimum. The code says you have to at least put 75% of fluorescent lighting onto your building. Yeah? So it's forbidden by law to do a moderate building in Las Vegas. Quite interesting. It's a complete inversion of an urban vision. Yeah, and I think there's a couple of guys who wrote in the history also about the kind of freedom you see in Las Vegas. Yeah, but actually Las Vegas has one of the biggest building codes I've ever seen. Everything is stipulated. Everything, every little shitty sign has a certain regulation attached to it. So that completely sobered up my whole imagination of this kind of mythical place of Las Vegas. And then also, just for you guys, the city of London is also quite interesting for me as a case study. I looked at their plan maybe 10 years ago, and there was also this kind of supplementary planning guidelines. And you probably all heard about these view corridors, right? You probably talk about nothing else here, right? I don't know, like what's their status right now, but I got this one document which I find really interesting, in what kind of precision the city of London was trying to administer these kind of ephemeral things as the image of the city through these view corridors. It produced this amazing view, yeah. Not only buildings adhere to these rules, but also plans. And here you see how it actually is engineered. So there's these kind of assessment points. It's in Disney World, you call it Kodak points. Yeah, you have like these kind of footprints, and there you have to take your photo. And I think that was the same ambition of the city back then. I might be wrong, but I'm just speculating. So once the tourist takes a picture of St. Paul's Cathedral, yeah, it should not be penetrated or disturbed by high rises around it. Yeah, so the blue sky should be maintained around the cupola, around this monument. But what's interesting, that's kind of a kind of banal thing. But what's interesting is the view shadow St. Paul produces, and that's how they measured it. Yeah, at a height of 1.60 meters. And they took the photos, and they said that should be free. These photographs then should be free of any kind of visual pollution. But the view shadow is interesting, because what you can actually do here, and which produces a huge loophole, so if you zoom in, you see all these high rises aggregating behind the cupola of St. Paul's. And this is, of course, like my kind of interpretation of it, but I always get asked, is it really the case? Yeah, I mean, I can't tell you the story here, but I have always big pleasure to tell this elsewhere. So I think the story of rules is not only how to comply with those rules, but also how to find loopholes in these kind of sets of regulations. Here is a kind of, and there again, the kind of Americans that have no word for Spielraum, like they do it in a very perfect way. So these two pictures tell a lot about different planning cultures. Here you see a picture out of Switzerland. This is how Switzerland looks like when it's not in the Alps, but like around Zurich, it looks like this. And then here you see Mulholland Drive, California. So CH versus CA. And there is a lot of similarities between these two pictures. I always try to ask the audience what is the difference between the two. So here you don't see any buildings, right? And here you also don't see any buildings. Here, it is kind of clear why you don't see any buildings. Because at one point, the planning law in Switzerland says there's a red line around all the existing settlements, and this is just outside these like buildable areas. So there's a kind of it's absolutely forbidden to build any buildings here. The result is, of course, you don't see any buildings. And so, yeah, no buildings yet. And then here, you also don't see any buildings, but for a very, very different and specific reason. Because here, the building rule says you can build whatever you want to and wherever you want to, but the only thing you have to make sure is that you must not be seen. Yeah? I think that's a very beautiful difference. It doesn't say absolutely don't build here, but it connects building to a certain condition, yeah? The condition that you're not being seen, yeah? And there are, if you look closer, there are buildings here, yeah? It's full of buildings. But they're all hidden behind bushes and trees and behind the topography. And this is the kind of subtle difference between these two images. And it's also like amazing to see at what kind of precision they measure that, because they measure it exactly at 1.2 meters above street level, which is exactly, I mean, I think they did a huge study on that. It's the average height of your eyes when you're sitting in a car and drive along Mulholland Drive. Yeah? 1.2 meters. And then, of course, like all the buildings that are here can hide perfectly behind these kind of rocks and plants. But it's also like, but the LA planning department is also like kind of nice, yeah? So if you happen to build a structure which you can, for some reason, see from the street, they give you a phone call and make you just plant some more bushes, yeah? That everything is hidden again and not being perceived. So the kind of natural landscape beauty and the kind of consistency of the landscape is still maintained. So if you drive there for the first time, you think, yeah, this is amazing, yeah? This is an amazing place. It's surrounded by city, but there's no city on those hills. But actually there is a city, but it's completely in the back. So the planning guidelines of LA are basically no guidelines, but they are a manual for playing hide and seek. And this is really bizarre, yeah? And this is almost the end of my talk. This, like, if there's no trees that are high enough to hide your structure, there is the Santa Monica color wheel, yeah? Which describes all the colors that are there in these mountains. There's the blue of the sky, there's the pink of the periwinkle, and so forth. So there is a strange idea, once you paint your house in one of these colors, whether it's pink or light blue, it's also turning out to be invisible. That's why you only see pink houses in LA. So this is the kind of introduction to these very creative guys, which I also admire very greatly. Also because of his hair, of course, but this guy is one of few developers who I think who really exercise a great deal of creativity in what they do. And one example is his One World Tower right next to the UN Secretary building. Usually it's completely forbidden to build there. There is something that is called a gentleman's agreement, which says, okay, you can't build higher than the world's headquarters of 153.9 meters. But then, 2001, Donald Trump is able to build this building, which is almost 100 meters taller than the world. And the question is really how he did it, because the rules really say, okay, don't build higher than that. And here's some secret calculations we found of his new Trump Tower. So there, also in New York, there's a couple of loopholes or a couple of things built into the code which really challenge or trigger the kind of ambition of these developers. So there is a kind of, this is the original square footage he can build. So he gets some 10% more because this is the kind of as of right amount he can build. Then he gets 20% more because he builds some kind of phony plaza on the ground, which adds some kind of public space to the city. Yeah, 20% more. That's another 40,000. Then he convinces his neighbors who haven't built to their full potential to sell their air rights. Yeah, their potential ability to build higher themselves. He bought it from them, so that adds another amount of square footage. And this is not enough, so that makes 72 floors. And then he has the idea to just add 20% more ceiling height to each floor. And this is the whole secret, how he ends up with an 856-foot tall tower, which is 200 feet taller than allowed by the law. So I think this is really this is a kind of masterpiece of calculation and trying to find every loophole he can in order to thwart the UN Secretary building. So he's extremely proud of that, and that's why he also puts it on his website, of course. Another one which is really amazing to look at is Jack Parker. He's a colleague of him. He's also a real estate developer, and he built this kind of very unassuming hotel residential tower in Midtown Manhattan. It's really a boring building, nothing special about it, but what's really special about it is that he was able to build this building at all. It's a very tiny lot, and there's all kinds of regulations, yeah, which kind of basically prohibit him to build this building, yeah. The worst one or the strongest one is the sky exposure plane, which happens to start at 85 feet at this area and just slices off the top of this kind of extruded volume. So basically, he wasn't able to build anything that size. But he managed, and the funny thing is, and that is not only his creativity, but also the creativity of his lawyers. It's the only building, I guess, in the world that pretends to be two buildings, yeah? It's the residential tower in their kind of argumentation, and a hotel, yeah. So what he did, he got two different kinds of building permits, yeah, one from the commercial section of the planning department, and one from the housing unit of the planning department. So he really got away with it by saying, hey, wait a minute, this is not one building, this is actually two. And then of course, he was able to put these two buildings on top of one another. And in order to reinforce or kind of to underline his honesty, he also constructed this little incision in the building to also indicate that it's actually really two buildings and not one. And so for a long time, his hotel rooms were the only ones who had this kind of pristine view and this kind of priceless view onto Central Park. Yeah, that's all my fascination with rules. Thank you very much. Is there any rule-based question? Yes.
Thank you very much for the talk. It's fantastic. You brought it to a stranger who asked the town to paint it red, and then the politician coming to Venice Biennale and hearing bird singers, and then to the big guy near the church who pushed out everyone else, and then to the city of London.
Yes.
And my question would be is first, I think you hint at the responsibility of the big guy to the land at some point of the whole thing.
To the what?
To the place they built.
Yeah.
But usually everyone just think about the regulation on top.
Yes.
No one care about the ground.
Yes.
And that's where your lawn mower, kind of the lawn thing, is very interesting to me in a sense because it's the environment that makes people tied to the land.
Yes.
And I think that is a criticism a lot to the foreign investment into many places to build empty. So do you think there's another way of regulation to tie people to the land with responsibility and they should care about it?
Oh, the relationship to the land. I mean, the land always plays a strange role. Yeah, role. Like basically, the whole FAR, yeah, the floor area ratio, like connects the very top to the very bottom of or the very basis of the land. Yeah, by multiplying it. So I think everything is like every one of these rules are kind of connected to the land. What we found interesting, like I guess I can't really answer this question, like whether it's connected to the land. But what we found interesting is that these kind of regulation also not only tie the kind of big collective interest, yeah, which is very hard to construct, yeah, to very obvious individual ones, yeah. This is a kind of clear. This is a kind of obvious story of that. And of course, like the kind of collective interest is very much embedded in the rule. But what we also found out with the kind of LA example of this kind of, like there's also hedges, yeah, between individual neighbors. Like these rules also like connect like different like individual parties of the city together, yeah. So there's like it's not only the kind of the individual connected to the bigger good of the city, but it also like connects like on the very ground like these kind of individual interests to one another. And I think that's something which I also find very interesting, yeah, to discuss. Like how do we influence each other, yeah? There's not only the kind of hierarchy coming from top to bottom, but it's also like this kind of negotiation that starts between equal parties, yeah? The one beautiful thing I didn't show was the hedge height, yeah? If I plant a hedge, yeah? It's the most critical thing you can ever do, yeah? Because I plant the hedge on my land, yeah? So it's my hedge, yeah? Not his. But he can come and say, please cut your hedge. It's too tall. It takes all the sun away, yeah? It takes away my view and so forth. So basically, like in terms of property, he cannot do anything because it's my property, yeah? But then, of course, there are regulations in place that also let him somehow intrude into my property. And I think that's very interesting, how these rules sometimes really like start to make these kind of mutual negotiations possible at first, yeah? Because there's a couple of ideal hedge heights, the one for my neighbor and mine, yeah? And then the city comes in order to not like have all neighbors fight with one another, say, okay, the hedge can only be that high, yeah? And then peace is kind of restored. So yeah, the land question I cannot really answer, but of course everything has to do with the kind of plot line as well, yeah? The plot line is one of the kind of frameworks where these kind of rules kind of attach to.
So how does the past matter in the present?
Yeah, I mean,
I'm sorry to be annoying.
I mean, we are like, I don't know like how much the past matters for every one of you. I mean, I find the past or history some kind of like a very strange thing in our discipline, yeah? So we like for a couple of years we are kind of investing our time also in order to find our own personal relationship to these kind of past or historical facts, yeah? To add them with some kind of contemporary stories and contemporary present tense ideas. So the only thing which I like to do at the moment is to talk about these two things together, or to talk about collective form through history, or about collective form through history through collective form. Yeah, so I like very much that we as architects start to really like work with history, but in a kind of experimental way, if you would say, yeah, because we are. I mean, at least I'm not an historian, but I have a certain interest in that, because also, like the rules, like these are all like, I didn't invent one of those rules, yeah? We just analyzed them and documented them. But I think they also, like, they are still in place, yeah? So there is a strong trajectory from the past, not only into the kind of contemporary, but also into the future. So and that's what kind of triggers my interest in the past, maybe.
Alex, I was wondering, I know that you also practice. I was wondering if you'd ever had a go at writing your own rules. And because there seems to be an interesting approach to them that in your take they can be provocative. They don't need to be, they're not about, there's a provocation associated with the rule. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we tried to do that, and we also found out that we cannot use a lot of them at the same time. There's a kind of maximum maybe of 3 or 4, otherwise it becomes too deterministic. Then we end up in a kind of suburban gridlock, where there's no way of playing anymore, and there's no Spielraum or space of discretion. What was also a strong experience is a couple of years it was kind of fashionable by architects to say, when they had a crazy shape, a crazy or strange looking envelope, to say, hey, it wasn't my fault, it was the regulations that produced this building. And I find that really fascinating, like how to withdraw your own hands, like to really like to say, no, it's not my authorship. The author is the city or the kind of bigger public interest. So I mean, that is a certain polemic or rhetoric, to almost like objectify or to say, I take my hands off. It's in a certain way it's nice because you really like you counter the idea of the creator, which is a kind of 70s idea, or whatever. So that's going to be continued in that game. But then at the same time, of course, I said, okay, then show me the rule. Let's talk about these rules. What exactly made your building look like this and not like this? And then, the beauty of the rules I really didn't find in these kind of strange-looking buildings, which try to work with those rules, but I found the beauty in the Jack Parkers and Donald Trumps, who build like rather unassuming buildings, but like they somehow got away with it. There was a lot of creativity also injected in that, a lot of subversion actually. But not by saying these are bad rules, but to kind of swim with those sharks and try to sneak something in or try to like interpret them in their ways. And I think that's quite interesting. But of course, I think we should not be like these kind of lemmings to say, hey, these shitty regulations, I can't work, or I have to do it in a certain way. But I think the ideal thing would be, and that's why I also had to write this book in a certain tone, that is not some boring, stupid administrative regulations or bureaucracy, but it's actually a very forceful tool that I think we could or we should maybe as designers also create or change. And of course a lot of rules also get changed by architects. At the same time, most of them are being done by lawyers, economists, politicians. But there was a time like when like in New York, for example, the Urban Design Group in the 70s under Mayor Lindsay, he really had like a group of architects to advise him to change one or the other rule. For example, like when they refined the building code in New York in 1961, they used Seagram building as their role model. Seagram building was actually the kind of trigger for all these kind of plaza type high-rises, because they suddenly saw, hey, we can, like, it's, first of all, it's a kind of, it's the future, it's not the kind of bulky types, but it's the slender, elegant high-rises, and then we also get like public space, which we don't have to construct ourselves. But also, but Mies also, I think, said when he first came there to Seagram with Philip Johnson, he was saying he never expected anybody to be on that plaza. And in many instances in New York, you still don't see any people on these kind of plaza types of urban spaces.
say anything. Well, maybe one question, right? I think what was quite interesting is how I read it. I think there's almost a deliberate attempt on your side to talk about these things as a problem, let's say, of design, right? And I think that's not just the rules, but I think also the other projects you presented. Of course, I think underlying that is what I would believe is in some ways, a socio-political at times, or an economic question, right, or a legal question, right, which you don't really mention or talk about.
Yeah.
But I think it'd be just interesting to see why that is, or what your take is on this.
I mean, but one is for very practical reasons. Like every one of those rules would fill an entire book about these questions. But I think when I started this research, I was always like shying away, or trying not to get too deep into that, because then it would make it super heavy, and I would have to really write like 10 or 12 books about it. So I also like this kind of lightheartedness about these rules. That actually allows me to take it out of their kind of legal, jurisdictional context, and to take them and to take them as something which I'm interested in, and which I really like, and which I can also handle. But of course, like there is a ton of context that is socio-political, which is economical. But I was really interested to discipline them, to get them into the discipline of art, into the discourse of architecture. So to sneak them, to take them, to hijack them from this kind of legal discourse, for example, and that was there was a certain reduction necessary to actually get them transferred.
I guess one of the reasons why I'm asking the question is also with the Western towns, right? I think it's kind of a commentary on the idea of what a different idea of a collective form is, right? Which of course is in some ways much more subversive than, let's say, I mean, like Maki's idea was very much a formal graphical idea of organization.
Yeah, I mean, this is a very positive and very nice reading of it. Like other people say, why did you do this? Why did you look at these Western towns? Do you want to like now design Western towns? It's exactly not about that. It's a certain way of thinking, which we try to transport by using those towns as a vehicle. It's not about the act, which has to do with the kind of the boundary between fictional and the real, and also with these kind of urbanistic questions about infrastructure, for example. So for us, it was a very adequate vehicle to use those plans, because somehow they have no context. You don't get into the kind of actual context of El Paso. So you can also start to talk about these things in a very abstract way with these kind of Western towns, which is on the one hand very nice, but also contains a lot of problems, of then relocating those issues back into the real, like this kind of transfer. It's also kind of problem of transfer, just the same as it is with the rules.
Okay, I think if there's nothing else.
Yeah, thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed it.